He's going to take some questions, not long speeches, questions. And I say questions, one sentence. If it gets to 3 or 4, I'm going to the next person. All right? So let's get questions, not speeches. Margaret.
The Ukraine project is completely bipartisan. Trump helped engineer this latest tranche of money. Why is this a bipartisan project?
The Ukraine project is a bipartisan project because the United States collectively is infected with russophobia. It infects Democrats and Republicans alike. It infects many independents. It infects a lot of people. The fear, irrational fear of Russia that is born from the ignorance about Russia. So that when they are told that Russia is responsible for X, Y, and Z and all of that is bad, they accept it at face value. We collectively in the United States have forgotten how to I'll just give you an example. My daughter, who I love dearly, I have twin daughters, Patricia, just graduated from Georgetown University, from this, her master's degree in the School of International Affairs. This is where the diplomats go to get trained. They tell you when you arrive in, look around the room. One of you is going to be the person in the room when great things are done. Elitist organization. She went with me to Russia on this last trip in December and January, and I showed her Russia. She got to meet some very interesting people, including Ramzan Kadyrov, who was the head of the Chechen Republic. Now, I'm not saying she has to embrace Ramzan. I don't say she has to agree with Ramzan. She got to meet Ramzan Kadyrov, who is a historical figure, to talk about how Russia and Chechnya made peace, which is sort of a big deal. She came back to Georgetown, and one would have thought they would have said, hey, sit down and tell us all about this. They condemned her and they tried to kick her out of the program because she was tainted by the reality of Russia. Because she saw the truth and they don't want her to know the truth. They don't want people to know the truth. They simply want you to accept at face value what you're being told by the professors, all of whom are former Foreign Service and CIA types, who are there not to educate you, not to open your mind, but to indoctrinate you. And so when you have Georgetown indoctrinating, Harvard indoctrinating, Stanford indoctrinating, every major institution in America indoctrinating the next generation of so-called Russian experts, and we've been doing that for decades since the end of the Cold War, who's there to tell the American people that what they're being told by mainstream media, which is being fed this information, is a bunch of horse manure? And that's the problem. That's what I'm trying to do. The reason why I've been going to Russia lately is to empower myself with the reality of Russia and bring it back and talk to people about the reality of Russia. Russia isn't perfect. No nation is. But Russia's not an enemy of America. And Russia, the way it functions, is not, destined for confrontation with America. Just the opposite. The Russian people want to be friends with America. There's no more welcoming land that I've been to lately than Russia itself. It's a hard struggle to fight against this, but this is why, because when you talk about Republican, when you talk about Democrat, you talk about bipartisan, they all come from the same establishment. It's a duopoly, but it's really a monopoly. It's, if you use the word deep state, you're accused of being, a conspiracy theorist, but there's something going on here called the establishment. Some people call it the interagency. In fact, I was just reading up on American nuclear policy, and the people that are responsible for it talk about, the deep connection with the interagency. Now, I didn't vote for the interagency. I don't know if you voted for the interagency on the last election or anybody else here who voted. It wasn't on the ballot, but it's there and it's running the show. It's an unelected mass of professionals, careerists, civil servants, military officers who are making all the policy and are dictating policy outcomes to the people whom we elect to higher office. And this is, I think, is what the problem is, and we have to find a way to beat that. I don't know the answer. This is why I look to people like yourself and Garland to say, hey, here's a problem. Maybe you got the solution, but it is a problem, and we're unfortunately not going to solve it this election cycle because we don't have the right people in the position where they can win. I mean, I'd love to see a Jill Stein be competitive. I'd love to see Cornel West be competitive. I'd love, these are great minds. These are great Americans. But unfortunately, as long as you have to have the money, it makes it difficult. Now, maybe we can change it soon. We can get people to empower themselves. I don't know. That's why I look to you, Margaret, for your leadership and for your initiative. So, did I answer your question?
You did. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Go ahead.
I'm just going to bounce it up. Boom, boom, boom. So when you're done, pass it through.
Thank you, Scott. My name is Irving Lee. I'm a New Yorker, active in New York City politics. I do agree that, just to follow up on Margaret's question, that it's clear that there's a hidden government, there is a deep state apparatus, and I think the progressive movement, and maybe even some of the conservative movements who are against the war, do have a commonality that the war needs to end, and this hidden government needs to be removed to stop the wars. And I guess the biggest faction of it is the neoconservatives. They're very dominant, but they're very dangerous because they do anything to maintain power, to either blackmail, Jeffrey Epstein is an example of that, and violence. And we saw that with the Kennedy assassination. So we're dealing with powerful forces, but we need to focus on them, the fact that they are very much in charge, and that we need to stop them. That's the basic fundamental task for our movement today. Thank you.
I appreciate it. You can pass the micro. Y'all can hear me if I project
Yes.
with a semi-Marine Corps projection? I'm capable of going much louder, but I won't.
Hi, thank you, Scott.
Well, let me just address one thing here. I agree with everything you said, but the problem is we have an election in November, and if we just sit back and say the system sucks, we're not going to be able to make a difference, then we've blown an opportunity. This is why, and again, I'm as politically naive as it gets, but on September 28th, I'm organizing something called Operation Dawn. Dawn stands for, basically, it's a challenge. What would you do to save democracy, save America, save the world with your vote in November? It's a simple question. What would you do? What would you be willing to do? And people say, well, I'm not going to vote Republican, I'm not going to vote Democrat, I'm not going to do this. Okay, what if you voted for peace? What if you voted to prevent nuclear war? What if, because look at this election, this nation's divided, pretty much close to 50-50 as you could get. There are critical battleground states where the difference of the votes are going to be measured in tens of thousands. What if we could get, let's say Michigan, let's say it's a 20,000 vote swing. What if we got 50,000 Michiganders to say we commit our vote to the candidate who between now and November 5th best articulates a solution to the war problem, a way to prevent nuclear war. Now you're going to say, why are they going to listen? Because I got 50,000 people. You want to win Michigan? You got to go through this issue right now. Because if you don't, the other side may decide to, and I'm telling you right now, as November gets closer, people are going to be counting the states, and suddenly we might have a chance to put this issue on the agenda. Not because we're pro-Democrat, not because we're pro-Republican, because we're pro-America, because we're pro-peace. Make your vote count this election cycle by lining it up with the one issue on the ballot today, which is about the existential survival of America. Now I'm going to say something that may scare people. Dimitri, I hope I don't scare you, but we are on a path towards a nuclear war with Russia. It's an inevitable path. I've studied Russian nuclear doctrine, I've studied American nuclear doctrine. And when you look at what's happening today, where we have the NATO and the United States lowering the threshold for the use of tactical nuclear weapons, when we have Russia saying, therefore, we shall lower the threshold, then the United States says, well, we're going to redeploy intermediate range missiles into Germany in 2026. And Russia says, well, if you do that, we're going to build new ones and we're going to deploy them too. Now I bring you back to the 1980s where I lived. You know, back when I said I joined that organization to get rid of those missiles, the reason why that was such an important job is that if we hadn't gotten rid of those missiles, we'd all be dead today. I firmly believe that. We were headed in a direction where there was going to be a mistake, a miscalculation, a misjudgment. And when you have missiles that when a mistake is made are going to hit Moscow in 12 minutes, and your protocol for deciding what you're going to do to determine whether or not it's a mistake or not is a 15 to 30 minute protocol, you're out of time by definition. So you will default to launch mode. Had we not had this treaty in place in 1995, Boris Yeltsin was presented with a scenario where they detected a missile that the Russian system said was a Trident nuclear armed missile on a trajectory to hit and decapitate Moscow. They brought him the football, and they said, you got to launch now, boss. We don't have time. Launch now. He didn't, because there were no intermediate range missiles. He was able to take a breath, and it was a mistake. But what if it had been a Pershing II missile? Now there's no time to say, let's wait, let's pause, let's hit pause. You have to launch, boom. Now they launch, we launch, everybody launches, we all die. The missiles we're deploying to Europe, to Germany in 2026 can hit Russian strategic command and control sites, which means we can launch a preemptive strike against Russia, which means Russia has to treat any potential launch scenario from these missiles as a preemptive strike designed to decapitate, which means they now have to reconfigure to launch on detect. Meaning the second they detect the launch, because now these are hypersonic missiles, so they're going to come in at 6 minutes. So boom, 6 minutes. You don't have time to debate, hey, it's a mistake. Bam, you fire. But remember, these missiles are threatening Russia's strategic sites. So when you fire, it's not just a response to European targets. You're going to be hitting everything. It's all over, all she wrote. We all die. That's our future, ladies and gentlemen. That's the trajectory we're headed on. You don't believe me? Fine. Put your head in the sand. Join me on top of my roof in August of 2026 as I wait for the big flash. But I'm not willing to go quietly into that night. I am a line out of the Dylan Thomas poem. I will not go gently into that good night. I will rage against the dying of the light, and I need you to rage too. I need you to be scared to death. I need you to be infuriated that our government's heading us down this path. The Russians won't talk to us today. Why? Because we still have a policy of seeking the strategic defeat of Russia, which means that we want to defeat you, but we want you to get rid of the one weapon that prevents us from defeating you, which is your nuclear weapons. Why would the Russians talk to us? The last remaining arms control treaty, New START, expires in February of 2026. You see where I'm going at with 2026, ladies and gentlemen? What is the United States going to do in response to this? We are on the path of building more nuclear weapons without limitations. This is a new nuclear arms race. Not only will it be prohibitively expensive, but extraordinarily dangerous. What can we do to stop it? I just told you. Operation Dawn. It might be a pipe dream. But I told you, I'm not going down soft. I'm not going to go down without a fight. And I'd like as many Americans as possible to join me.
Who's that?
Hi, my name is Mitchell Cohen. I wanted to take a step back, if I can, and talk about whether your book covered the fight between both in Ukraine and Russia over food and the corporatization of the food system in both countries, where the genetically modified food was banned in both Russia and in Ukraine until the war began, to the extent that it did. And then we had Monsanto moving in to Ukraine, and I saw the food pipeline similar to the oil pipeline, the energy pipelines within Russia. And I was wondering if you covered that at all. I did have an article in Covert Action about that a year ago or so, and I think that's essential, actually, to understanding some of it, not taking away all the stuff about nuclear war, about NATO, about putting in biowarfare facilities in Ukraine, all over Ukraine.
All right, that's the question.
So that's my question.
All right, no, I mean, first of all, because you wrote such an outstanding article in Covert, there was no need for me to put it in the book. But that aside,
It wasn't outstanding enough.
we'll work on it. Covert Action book. No, we had to choose a number of topics. I have written extensively in other forums about not necessarily the Monsanto issue, but how the West in Ukraine has weaponized grain in food. And so I've talked about that. It's touched briefly, but not in any substantive fashion. I think there's a couple throwaway lines because it was an interview, but it is an important issue. It's a critically important issue, one that's not well covered in the West, or if it's covered, it's done, Russia's trying to starve the world, when the reality is Russia's trying to feed the world. And it's not just about grain, it's about fertilizer. about getting the fertilizer out in time so that these nations in need can ensure that they have crops that can feed themselves. Because if their crops fail in Africa, they're going to need grain from somewhere else. What kind of grain are they going to get? Monsanto, genetically modified grain, or the healthy stuff coming from Russia? It's a great topic. It's an important topic. I apologize, I didn't cover it in the book. There were some things that I was only given so many pages, so we have to take some
Who's
checks.
next?
Next.
A question.
Up here, I'll take it up there. Thank you. Who had their hand? Okay, we're gonna go ladies first, and then up to you, just because we're gentlemen, right?
Thank you so much, Scott. I have a question, and I just can't figure it out. I've always wondered why they have the United States has such a hard-on for Ukraine, and it's that, is it capitalism? What is the goal? Is the goal a one world government? What's the goal? Is it only to take money? Is it to take power? I want to know what the crux of that is. And I also want to say that you are so much more powerful than you think you are, everybody in here, because, I'm just a little nurse, and I come out, and when I talk to somebody and it's a mustard seed, if you have one little bit of information that piques somebody's interest, and you have the information, it's a mustard seed and it grows. And I just want to say, this is a beautiful mushroom cloud of planting seeds to everybody. You're more powerful than you think you are, and keep talking, everybody, and thank you so much.
What's the point, what's the main goal of the
Yep.
Ukrainian
Well,
takeover?
thank you for the question. This is just my assessment, so I can't claim to be all knowing here. We've been using Ukraine, we being the United States, have been using Ukraine as a tool to take down the Soviet Union and now Russia since the end of the Second World War. A lot of people aren't familiar. When the Russians talk about Stepan Bandera, they talk about the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalism. These are very bad people. Just ask the Poles. Google Volyn and see what they did to the innocent civilians. The Poles, 110,000. But it's more than that. As the Russians took over Ukraine, the OUN stayed behind and fought as part of an extension of the Nazi Germans. The Germans would actually drop in sabotage units that would hook up and make sure they had weapons, coordinate their tactics. The Nazis under the Gehlen organization were working with the Banderists up until the very end. And then when the war ended, the Americans took over the Gehlen organization, and we continued to use Nazis, we never denazified them, Nazis, to support the Banderists, who were Nazis murdering Russians. I'm not an expert on this, but my understanding is that Russia brought in a whole bunch of Eastern Ukrainians into Western Ukraine to do the teacher jobs, to help fill this, because so many people died, and then Banderists butchered them. And we're talking hundreds of thousands. I'm not talking about small numbers. Butchered hundreds of thousands of civilians. Butchered them. When I say butchered, I mean the literal definition of butchered. Not shooting them, not strangling them. I'm talking about hacking them to death while they live. This is what they did. One of the things that the Banderas were known for is having choir women sing outside of the house as they hacked the children to death inside to cover the screams of the children. This is evil personified. And America supported these people. We funded them. The CIA started dropping people. We had displaced persons in Germany. We trained them. We dropped them in. We kept this war going up until about 1954-55. Then the Soviet Union was able to defeat them. Hundreds of thousands fled to safety in Canada, the United States, Great Britain, Australia, diaspora camps. 60 miles from my home, right up here in Elvin, New York. There's an OUN camp where they train their children, indoctrinate their children on Stepan Bandera. They have what's called Heroes Hill. And on Heroes Hill, they have the statue, Stepan Bandera, and 3 other wonderful, evil Nazi types. I paid them a visit a little while ago. I shouldn't have done it. But I get so pissed off, excuse my language. So I just went in there and, I shouldn't say this, but I will. Wagner has the patch, and they infamously go around the world and hold the patch up to targets that they disagree with. And I had been given a Wagner patch by Wagner, so I went to the Bandera statue and took a selfie of my Wagner patch next to Bandera, just to say, excuse my language, I won't use the word, but screw you. Screw them. In America, we have a statue to step on Bandera, a mass murderer, a Nazi. In America. In Canada, they have a deputy prime minister who is a Banderist at the core. They have infiltrated everything, and this is what happened. You see, about 200,000 were put into the Gulag, Soviet prison camps. But then Nikita Khrushchev came in his de-Stalinization period, and he liberated them, the political prisoners, and let them out. And they came back to Ukraine, where the CIA continued to fund their operations through these diaspora groups. So we kept sending literature and instructions into these people as they reintegrated themselves into Ukrainian society, built their way up, so that by the time 1990 came along, the Banderas were back in power. They just weren't calling themselves Banderas, but they were the nationalists. And they're the ones who led the 2014 coup with the CIA's assistance. Why do we have a hard-on for Ukraine? Because we've been using Ukraine to destroy the Soviet Union and Russia ever since the end of the Second World War. We don't care about Ukrainians. That's the other thing I want to say. For anybody out there who says, well, America's fighting for Ukraine, no, we're not. We have allowed 500,000 plus Ukrainian men to die on the field of battle. How is that being a friend? We have allowed tens of millions of Ukrainian civilians to be displaced from their homes. How is that a friend? For all the people out there that say, I'm pro-woman, I'm pro-child, you know that we have sent hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian women into Europe where their only future is to be a part of the sex trade. That's it. They're not going to get a job. They have to sell themselves, and their children now won't get an education, and they're going to grow up homeless, without a home, without stability. Is this what a friend does? No. We are the opposite of friends to the Ukrainians. We are their worst nightmare. We are their worst enemy, but we bribe them and bribe them and bribe them with money and hope and power. And all we've done is sacrifice a nation and sacrifice a people. Ukraine is a nation filled with wonderful people. The average Ukrainian is just like the average Russian. They speak the same language, they have the same history, they have everything, they're so united in what they believe in. And yet, thanks to the United States, we have driven a wall between them, and we've allowed this hatred to fester. And it's one-sided. I'm not saying that the Russians are innocent and incapable of doing anything wrong, of course not, just like America. You've got people, but I went to a Russian restaurant in Washington, D.C., very famous one, Miryan, I think it was called, Mirvan or something. Yeah, Marivan. They had to close because Ukrainians won't allow it to work. I was supposed to speak at the Russian Samovar here in New York City. Couldn't. Ukrainians shut it down. I went to Moscow to a Ukrainian restaurant where the waiters and waitresses wear Ukrainian national costume, where the menu is in Ukraine. They have the Ukrainian language there, and it's well attended. There's no hatred. It's just the Russians don't hate Ukrainians. But the Ukrainians have been trained to hate the Russians. And it's driven families apart. And it's just part of this cycle of hatred and violence that has to end. It has to come to an end. Yes, sir.
I think you answered a lot of it already. I was just gonna, how much blame do you want to lay on the U.S.? How much did we actually cook up the problem?
How much blame do I want to lay on the U.S.? 100%. There wouldn't be a war in Ukraine right now if it weren't for the United States. This conflict would not have happened. I mean, there's so many complexities, but I mean, NATO expansion. The United States did that. I mean, we're now finding out, not 1 inch eastward, James Baker, we can go on and on and on and on, all the commitments that were made, but you didn't put it in the treaty. Well, I don't know, the last time I checked, my handshake is my bond, and if I'm a government representative and I meet with you and I commit something in face, I'll just go voice. It is, yeah, the Ukrainians got me. But I might have turned it off accidentally. I'm not technically competent, so.
You did it, man. I'm gonna blame them.
But the United States is to blame 100%. I mean, that's,
Is that it?
thanks to Randy Credit Code, we now have a working microphone. Okay, next question. Yes, sir.
The people whom identify closely with Ukraine, Victoria Nuland, Anthony Blinken, I'm told come from, they have Ukrainian roots, ethno-religious roots there. I never heard of this representative's name until back in June. Chrissy Houlihan from Pennsylvania, and a Democrat. Despite her Irish name at present, she's got a background that comes from Ukraine as well. She was spearheading the bill that included automatic registration for the selective service. Do you see any connection there between her background, perhaps, and Anthony Blinken's and Victoria Nuland's?
The question is, again,
I think it's that just use